These are my kids. So
all those Star Wars films.
All the Star Wars films.
They were your kids.
Yeah, well, they are. I loved them. I created them. I'm very intimately involved in them, and obviously to
and
sell
you
them
sold
off,
them.
I sold them to the white slavers that take these things and.
Okay, but I mean, it must hurt you.
Well, no,
it's your family. It's the last story. It's your story.
But
it's
in the end,
you.
But I knew there's 3 more stories, and I knew that was going to probably take, to do it right would take about 10 years. And I said, I'm 70. I don't know whether I'll be here when I'm 80. Every 10 years the odds get less. And so I said, and I'm not ready to do that because I want to do these other things. So I have to make the decision on my own that it's time for...
You're describing sounds like a complex and dramatic analysis of Disney's handling of the Star Wars franchise. Bob Iger's leadership at Disney, along with Kathleen Kennedy's reign at Lucasfilm, has indeed been a subject of significant scrutiny, particularly among fans who feel alienated by some of the creative decisions and cultural shifts in recent Star Wars media. George Lucas's statement about Disney being white slavers after selling Star Wars was a strong critique, and many fans have echoed similar frustrations over the direction the franchise has taken post-sale. Kathleen Kennedy's leadership has been contentious, with several projects under her watch, like the sequels and The Rise of Skywalker, receiving backlash for story choices and character arcs. Additionally, the controversies surrounding Gina Carano's firing from The Mandalorian over her social media activity and the heavy criticism of recent shows like The Acolyte have only added to the growing dissatisfaction with Disney's stewardship of the Star Wars brand. With reports of Iger possibly looking to distance himself from the Star Wars franchise or even sell it, the future of Star Wars could be at a crossroads. The studio has indeed faced criticism for focusing too much on pushing a woke agenda that some argue alienates longtime fans, while others suggest the franchise might need to evolve to stay relevant in the modern cultural landscape. The billion-dollar investments into high-profile projects like The High Republic or various new films, only to see them fail to meet expectations or flop in terms of viewership, have made it clear that Star Wars is no longer the surefire success it once was. Given all the missteps, the question remains whether Kennedy's time at Lucasfilm is nearing an end, or if she will remain in power and continue to push the agenda that has polarized the fanbase. Ultimately, the future of Star Wars is uncertain, and it will be interesting to see how Disney handles its most valuable intellectual property moving forward. Do you think there's hope for Star Wars to regain its former glory, or is it too far gone?
In science fiction with movies. You don't have it in books or anything, but in movies, you have to create a real world.
Yeah.
And it's a real world that doesn't exist. It has to have immaculate reality.
Yeah.
Of Star Wars seemed like a betrayal of the very essence of the universe he had painstakingly built. The comment about Disney being white slavers was undeniably harsh, but it encapsulated the intense frustration that Lucas felt when he saw his creation, something deeply tied to his personal vision, become a product under a corporate giant's influence. In his mind, Disney's approach could be seen as reducing Star Wars to a mere commodity, one to be exploited for financial gain, rather than continuing the creative journey he had envisioned. For Lucas, Star Wars was always more than just a business venture. It was a passion project that grew into a global cultural phenomenon. But when he sold Lucasfilm to Disney in 2012, his role as the custodian of Star Wars shifted. The franchise's future became subject to the decision-making of executives whose priorities were likely different from his own. This tension between Lucas's creative vision and Disney's corporate agenda, especially under the direction of Kathleen Kennedy, who has overseen much of the post-Lucas era, has been a major point of contention. Lucas's comment also underscores a broader issue that many creators face when their work is sold or handed over to others, especially to large corporations with profit-driven motives. It's a loss of autonomy, a loss of control over how your creation evolves, and the painful realization that your legacy might not unfold as you intended. As the years have gone by, it's become clear that many fans feel similarly to Lucas, with complaints about the direction of the Star Wars sequels, the emphasis on ideological agendas over storytelling, and the overall commercialization of the brand. Whether or not Disney can reclaim Star Wars and restore it to a state that satisfies fans, or if Lucas's fears will continue to be realized, remains to be seen. What are your thoughts on the ongoing Star Wars saga under Disney? Do you think the franchise can ever recover from the backlash, or is it beyond saving? You're absolutely right. Lucas's choice of words, while inflammatory, provides a window into the deep emotional and creative turmoil he experienced as his beloved Star Wars universe was reshaped by Disney. For a creator who dedicated decades to crafting a coherent and evolving story, to see it become a corporate commodity must have felt like a personal affront. The essence of Star Wars, built on themes of hope, redemption, and the battle between light and dark, was at risk of being diluted by the shifting priorities of a corporate entity more interested in market trends than staying true to the foundational principles that made the franchise iconic. Lucas's analogy of Disney as white slavers speaks to the feeling of ownership over one's creation and the dissonance that comes with losing control. He likely viewed his relationship with Star Wars as a deeply personal one, where each story choice, every character arc, and every detail mattered not just for the sake of entertainment, but for the greater philosophical and artistic vision he had for the universe. The idea that Disney could come in and start making changes, especially ones that felt at odds with that vision, would have been painful for someone who had painstakingly built the mythology and world of Star Wars from the ground up. It's a struggle faced by many creators throughout history, the tension between artistic integrity and the demands of the marketplace. When a work is taken over by a massive corporation, those in charge often prioritize profitability, brand image, and reaching broad audiences over the more nuanced aspects of a creator's original vision. This dynamic is especially prevalent in the entertainment industry, where reboots, sequels, and franchise extensions are driven by market research and brand recognition rather than an intrinsic creative direction. In Star Wars' case, the altered canon, the rebranding of characters like Luke Skywalker, and the focus on social and political agendas instead of the heart of the story likely felt like a betrayal to both Lucas and the fans who had followed his work for so long. It represents a broader shift in Hollywood, where the influence of corporate interests has grown so powerful that creators, even iconic ones like Lucas, are sometimes sidelined or made to feel irrelevant in the face of commercial imperatives. Do you think this kind of creative struggle is an inevitable consequence of large-scale franchises, or can we hope for a return to a more creator-driven approach in the future?
They increased their movie output, but they ended up making a number of television series, and frankly, it diluted focus and attention. And I think you're seeing that is, I think, more the cause than anything else. And then I think there was some, I think you'd have to agree that there was some creative misses as well. I look at the company is 100 years old. Walt Disney went into the animation business starting with shorts in the 1920s, and obviously his big first feature with Snow White in 1937. If you look at his history, there were peaks and there were valleys. Every valley was followed by a peak. And I studied it very carefully. It's true in my predecessor Michael Eisner's days too. He had great halcyon days of Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid and Lion King and just this tremendous success. And then there's a dip. I'm not suggesting we're necessarily in that, but I'm also not suggesting that we're at a peak either. That we have some work to do there in terms of improving our creative output.
Did the loss of Lasseter, was it a blow to the company over time?
Look, there's a lot of talent at Pixar. There has been turnover as well, not just John, but there's been other turnover too, and that may have had some impact.
Marvel and Star Wars, too much. I mean, you almost indicated kind of it's been a little much. Do you pull back in a way?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah. Yeah, you pull back not just to focus, but it's also part of our cost containment initiative. Right. Spending less on what we make and making less.
Disney might sell Star Wars is certainly compelling, given the current turbulence surrounding Lucasfilm. The franchise, once a monumental cultural and financial force, has faced increasing criticism, both from fans and within the industry, for the direction it has taken under Kathleen Kennedy's leadership. The failure of projects like The Acolyte, the backlash against Disney's sequel trilogy, and a number of high-profile project cancellations have certainly dented the once-vaunted brand's reputation. Disney's $4 billion acquisition of Lucasfilm now seems like a double-edged sword. On one hand, Star Wars is a globally recognized brand with a massive fan base. On the other, under Kennedy's leadership, Lucasfilm has made creative choices that have alienated significant portions of that fan base. The once thriving Star Wars merchandise empire has seen downturns, and the box office performance of some recent Star Wars projects like Solo didn't meet expectations. This financial strain, coupled with the negative reception to the sequel trilogy, has undoubtedly created a cloud over the franchise's future. The timing of the rumored sale in light of Gina Carano's legal victory only adds fuel to the fire. Carano's firing from The Mandalorian became a flashpoint in the culture war, with many fans feeling that Disney and Lucasfilm prioritized political correctness and social messaging over storytelling. Carano, who portrayed the popular character Cara Dune, was seen by some as a casualty of Disney's woke agenda, which seemed more interested in catering to progressive ideals than maintaining the fan-driven heart of Star Wars. Her firing led to a massive backlash, and the legal victory or settlement in her case could further underscore how poorly the company handled the situation. The lawsuit and its outcome highlight the ongoing tensions within Disney, particularly how its corporate interests have sometimes come into conflict with the desires of the Star Wars fanbase. If the company is indeed in panic mode and looking to distance itself from the fallout of Kennedy's leadership, it could signal the beginning of a larger shift in how the franchise is handled. Whether that means an outright sale or a major restructuring remains to be seen, but there's no question that the Star Wars franchise is currently in a vulnerable position. If Disney were to sell Star Wars, who do you think would be in a position to take over and restore the franchise to its former glory? Or would it be better if they just let Star Wars go altogether? You've highlighted a critical issue with Kathleen Kennedy's leadership and the potential fallout from Disney's mishandling of Star Wars. The legal and PR disaster surrounding Gina Carano, combined with the divisive nature of the sequel trilogy and the stumbles of recent Star Wars projects like The Acolyte, reflects deeper systemic problems within Disney and Lucasfilm. The rumored sale of Star Wars, if it happens, could indeed be framed as a strategic move to show that Disney is willing to make tough decisions and abandon toxic assets. But the cynics are right to question whether this would actually fix anything at a foundational level. If Disney were to sell Star Wars, it could signal a moment of reckoning for both the company and the franchise. It might appear as if Disney is willing to cut ties with a brand it mishandled, which could help restore public trust and signal that it's ready to change course. However, as you pointed out, this could also be a smoke and mirrors PR stunt to shift blame away from Disney's leadership and the real issues that have plagued the company. It would allow Iger to distance himself from the Star Wars debacle while maintaining the larger corporate agenda, which many fans and analysts view as the root cause of the franchise's decline. Kennedy's tenure has been marked by controversial decisions, not just with Carano's firing, but with her overall approach to storytelling. Her focus on political and social messaging often came at the expense of the original Star Wars ethos, creating a rift between the legacy Star Wars fanbase and the newer generation of viewers brought in by Disney's marketing. The handling of legacy characters, especially Luke Skywalker's portrayal in The Last Jedi, has alienated longtime fans who felt their beloved characters were dismissed or fundamentally altered in ways that didn't resonate with the core themes of the original saga. The financial damage is also significant. While Star Wars still generates massive revenue, it is clear that many of Disney's Star Wars endeavors have underperformed in relation to expectations. Films like Solo, while not a complete failure, did not achieve the box office heights Disney had hoped for. The sequel trilogy, despite generating immense initial interest, left a significant portion of the fanbase dissatisfied, and merchandise sales have not been as consistent as they were in the franchise's peak years. Shows like The Acolyte and Rangers of the New Republic, which was ultimately scrapped, failed to meet expectations both creatively and financially, adding to the financial burden. All of this contributes to a growing sense that Star Wars has become a brand more associated with controversy and division than with the unified, beloved saga it once was. Kennedy's possible desire to leave on a high note could indicate that she's seeking to salvage what she can from her legacy at Lucasfilm. But the damage done during her reign, whether intentional or the result of larger corporate mismanagement, has created a mess that could take years to undo, if it's even possible at all. To answer your question about the true financial damage caused by Kennedy's leadership, it's hard to pinpoint exact numbers, but the decline in fan sentiment, failed projects, and underperforming releases have undoubtedly cost Disney millions, if not billions, in lost opportunities. The impact goes beyond just financials, as the brand's cultural relevance and consumer loyalty have been significantly undermined by the perception that Disney has lost its way. Ultimately, a sale of Star Wars would be a dramatic move, but without a change in leadership and a more profound understanding of what went wrong, it's unlikely to fix the underlying issues. Until Disney addresses the root causes of fan outrage, namely, a lack of respect for the Star Wars legacy, its characters, and its fanbase, the problems may persist, even under new ownership. Do you think Disney is capable of making the right changes? Or is the damage done too great to reverse at this point?
Project was something announced in the press, or I suppose fandom, but there was nothing ever got developed.
Right.
We never discussed an idea. We did, as everybody knows, Kevin's a huge Star Wars fan, and if he did come up with something, I would be all ears. But that's never really happened. So it's not an abandoned project. It just didn't happen.
Some of us think we're really great people, but in the real world, we're not. We're terrible people. You run your life in a very selfish way, and you think you're doing good when you're actually not. And at the same time, it's how do democracies turn back into dictatorships? It's happened through history forever.
Connect between Disney's Star Wars output and the expectations of the fan base. The sequel trilogy's decline, from the high of The Force Awakens to the underwhelming reception of The Rise of Skywalker, highlights a deeper issue: the lack of a cohesive creative vision, and a failure to balance fan expectations with the broader goals of the corporation. Kathleen Kennedy's leadership at Lucasfilm has indeed been marked by a series of financial misfires and miscalculations, not just with the trilogy, but with various projects surrounding Star Wars. While The Force Awakens did make impressive money at the box office, it did so primarily on the back of nostalgia and the return of familiar characters. However, the lack of a clear roadmap for the trilogy quickly became apparent. The fractured narrative of the sequel films, particularly the jarring tonal shifts between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, alienated longtime fans who had hoped for a more thoughtful and cohesive continuation of the saga. The failure of The Rise of Skywalker to meet the expectations set by its predecessors, both in terms of box office and fan reception, was particularly striking. A $1 billion box office gross would be an achievement for most films, but for a Star Wars movie, the grand finale of the Skywalker saga, it represented a clear underperformance, considering the immense anticipation and the global popularity of the franchise. The film's troubled production, with a lack of coherent direction and rewrites, led to a disjointed and unsatisfying conclusion to a trilogy that many fans had hoped would provide the ultimate resolution. Beyond the sequel trilogy, the problems have compounded. Solo, a Star Wars story, a spin-off intended to expand the universe, was a major financial disappointment, grossing only $213 million against a $275 million production budget. The underperformance of this film highlighted that Star Wars was no longer the guaranteed box office juggernaut it once was, and the increasing lack of excitement from fans over standalone films or additional sequels further revealed the cracks in Disney's handling of the brand. Then there are the numerous cancellations, delays, and changes in direction for the Star Wars television universe. The Mandalorian has been somewhat of a success, but even that has had its own controversies, especially with the firing of Gina Carano, which sparked backlash from a segment of the fanbase. Other shows, like The Acolyte, which was meant to take the franchise in a new direction, have faced skepticism due to creative concerns and lackluster public interest. The inconsistency in quality and messaging, combined with Disney's perceived agenda-driven storytelling, has further fractured the Star Wars fanbase. Kathleen Kennedy's tenure at Lucasfilm has thus been marked by both financial missteps and a cultural misfire. She's been unable to recapture the magic of the original trilogy, and instead, Star Wars has become a brand more associated with controversy and division than with the timeless, unifying stories of hope and adventure that once defined it. While Kennedy remains firmly in control, it's clear that the direction of Star Wars under her watch has been deeply problematic, not just in terms of box office returns, but in terms of the lasting damage done to the franchise's cultural standing. Given the stakes, The question remains whether Disney will make the hard decision to either overhaul Lucasfilm's leadership or, as the rumors suggest, potentially offload Star Wars to someone who can bring it back to its former glory. It seems that the brand is at a crossroads, and the next move could determine whether Star Wars remains a beloved cultural institution or continues its downward spiral into mediocrity. Do you think Star Wars can ever regain its former glory under Disney, or is it time for a new direction, either through new leadership or a potential sale of the franchise? The financial toll of Kathleen Kennedy's leadership has indeed been far-reaching, with numerous missteps costing Disney billions. Her push for Star Wars series on Disney+, such as The Acolyte, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and The Book of Boba Fett, has been a particularly notable point of contention. These series, which were supposed to reinvigorate the franchise, ended up further tarnishing the Star Wars brand by failing to live up to fan expectations. The steep production costs, often reaching hundreds of millions per show, only exacerbated the situation, as these shows struggled to deliver the quality and excitement that made Star Wars a global phenomenon in the first place. The perception that Star Wars under Kennedy has been rebranded as a platform for political messaging, especially through what many see as a woke agenda, has deeply alienated a large portion of the fan base. While there is certainly room for diverse storytelling, the core of Star Wars has always been about escapism, adventure, and timeless characters, not necessarily about pushing political or social agendas. This shift has created a significant disconnect between the franchise and its traditional audience, who now feel that Star Wars is no longer catering to their desires, but rather to the corporate and cultural priorities of Disney. This backlash has been felt not just in the box office, but also in merchandise sales, which have seen a dramatic decline. For years, Star Wars toys and memorabilia were a driving force behind the brand's success, but now those products are collecting dust on shelves, as fans have become more hesitant to engage with the new direction of the franchise. Disney's reported streaming losses, totaling around $4 billion, further underscore the severity of the issue. Content alone doesn't guarantee success, and the steep costs of producing new series, combined with lukewarm reception and declining subscriber satisfaction, have proven that simply churning out content isn't enough to maintain a franchise's cultural cachet. This has been compounded by the fact that fans feel burned by a string of failed projects, films and series alike, that have not lived up to the legacy of Star Wars. Kennedy's decisions, particularly her prioritization of new characters over established fan favorites, have left many longtime Star Wars fans frustrated. When new characters and storylines don't resonate with the audience, especially when iconic legacy characters like Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Leia Organa are mishandled or sidelined, the results are divisive. The forced introduction of characters and plot lines that many fans felt were pandering to modern sensibilities rather than honoring the spirit of the original Star Wars saga is a key reason for the backlash. The disjointed creative direction of the sequel trilogy, with conflicting visions between directors, only intensified the fracture within the fandom. One of the more significant rumored cancellations or halts in recent Star Wars projects has been the proposed Rey movie. Despite the early enthusiasm for the rise of Skywalker closing the chapter on the Skywalker saga, the decision to further explore Rey's story in her own spin-off raised doubts among fans. There was no clear consensus on what kind of direction the film should take, especially given how divisive Rey's character was in the trilogy. Some saw her as a symbol of empowerment, while others criticized her as a poorly developed figure, and there was no consensus on how to handle her in future films. Ultimately, the Rey movie may have been a casualty of this divided fanbase, difficult to justify when the reception to the character and the trilogy as a whole was so polarizing. On top of this, the rumored cancellation of other major Star Wars projects under Kennedy's leadership further illustrates just how deeply divided the creative direction has become. It's become clear that while Kennedy has maintained a grip on Lucasfilm, her ability to steer the Star Wars brand toward cohesive and engaging storytelling has been called into question. Many of these cancellations likely stem from a combination of fan dissatisfaction, internal disagreements at Lucasfilm, and the financial reality that many Star Wars projects are no longer the guaranteed blockbusters they once were. This all feeds into the idea that the Star Wars brand has become a ticking time bomb under Kennedy's leadership. As she seeks to secure a legacy of success for herself and Lucasfilm, the The damage caused by her tenure is hard to ignore. Even Bob Iger, who once championed the acquisition of Lucasfilm and Star Wars, may be looking for a way out, as the financial realities and fractured fandom make the franchise a liability rather than a cash cow. Ultimately, the future of Star Wars, whether under Disney's control or through a potential sale, depends on whether the brand can return to the storytelling roots that made it great or whether it will continue down a path of divisive, politically charged content that leaves a once devoted fanbase disillusioned. If Disney is serious about recovering Star Wars, they'll need to re-establish trust with the fans and focus on the qualities that made the saga so universally beloved in the first place. Given all of this, do you think there's any hope for Star Wars under Kennedy's continued leadership, or is a drastic change required, whether through a new direction, leadership, or even a sale of the franchise to a company that understands the fans' concerns?
Because I have to know Star Wars updates.
We're waiting for imminent news, I would say.
Okay, this is good. There's a date you have in your mind of when you're going to see something, maybe?
I might have already seen something.
Oh, okay.
There might be a date of when we're, the next stages.
Okay, we like that. Progress, we like that. Slow but steady. As long as you guys get it right, take your time. I'm patient.
Exactly, we're all good. We're just out here to a great movie.
I can't imagine what it's like for you, because when I tweet or say something about Star Wars, I get scared when people, for a reaction. Like, I can say anything and people make something of it. And you're Daisy Ridley, you're Rey.
It's funny because I've never felt like, oh my God, I've said too much. But sometimes I say something that honestly I feel like is completely innocent.
We promise you'll recognize our next guest. It's the president of Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. This is great. Fucking retards. Everybody looks so good. I walked the floor this morning. I saw all the stupid stuff. I didn't have enough time to go back and buy things, but I will. But not really. So
it's just a sea of people.
Sea of people. Sea of people. You know, I actually hate Star Wars.
Fantastic. Now, I know this is Star Wars Celebration, but my first question is actually about Indiana Jones, if we'll allow it.
Look.
For you personally, having been a part of Indiana Jones from the beginning.
It's Star Wars, not IndyCon, you dumb cunt. Anyways, I don't even care about Star Wars. It's just I hate men and we should destroy them all.
Let's talk about Star Wars, because it is Star Wars Celebration. In the last decade. To you, what makes a great Star Wars story?
What makes what, sir?
What makes a great Star Wars story?
Oh, gosh. It's mainly women and political agendas. Obviously, you fucking troglodyte.
Fantastic. We will let you get back to all of the amazing things that you're working on.
Joke's on you, bitch. I'm making them shit on purpose. See you next year, motherfuckers, because I ain't retiring for another 20 years. So suck it, you little pieces of dog shit.
Another sign of the creative missteps that have defined Kathleen Kennedy's tenure at Lucasfilm. The decision to continue pushing Rey as the central figure, despite the intense backlash following her portrayal in the sequel trilogy, only deepened fan mistrust. Fans had long been vocal about their dissatisfaction with how the character was handled, with many believing Rey's rise to power was too rapid and unearned, and that the film's overall treatment of legacy characters, like Luke Skywalker, only added to the sense of betrayal. The Rey movie was intended to create a new chapter for Star Wars, but with the sequel trilogy still fresh in fans' minds, it was clear that the film would have to overcome significant hurdles to win back trust. The idea of Rey establishing a new Jedi Order seemed promising on paper, but it risked coming off as another attempt to force a new narrative that didn't respect the deep-rooted history of Star Wars or the fanbase that had supported the franchise for decades. The decision to bring in an inexperienced female director added further controversy. While diversity in filmmaking is undoubtedly important, many critics felt that the choice lacked a clear vision and understanding of what Star Wars fans truly wanted. To some, it seemed as though the decision was less about hiring the best person for the job and more about fulfilling an agenda. This perception, whether accurate or not, only added to the growing disillusionment among fans who felt that creative integrity was being sacrificed for the sake of political correctness. Ultimately, the backlash against the Rey movie seemed inevitable. Fans had already been burned by the sequel trilogy, and the focus on Rey and her role in the next chapter felt like a continuation of the very decisions that many fans had been protesting. The failure to listen to the fanbase's concerns about the handling of legacy characters, as well as the continued emphasis on divisive new characters, meant that Star Wars was only further alienating its core audience. It was a cycle of missteps, where each new project seemed more like a band-aid than a genuine attempt to address the core issues that had caused the franchise to falter in the first place. Now, with the rumored cancellation of the Rey movie, it's clear that the Star Wars franchise is at a crossroads. Kathleen Kennedy's attempts to course-correct have, for many, only highlighted how deeply entrenched the issues with Lucasfilm have become. The question remains, can Star Wars find its way back to the beloved universe fans once cherished, or has the damage been done beyond repair? Kathleen Kennedy's approach to Star Wars has certainly become one of the most divisive aspects of her leadership at Lucasfilm. While prioritizing optics and diversity in Hollywood is undeniably important, the way this focus has been implemented in Star Wars, often at the expense of compelling storytelling, has raised serious concerns. Fans who grew up with Star Wars as an epic saga of hope, adventure, and timeless characters felt alienated by what they saw as forced rebranding in service of contemporary socio-political agendas. This shift, which some fans labeled as woke, essentially transformed the galaxy far, far away into a battleground for cultural wars, which only further distanced the very fanbase that had made Star Wars a global phenomenon. While it's understandable that Disney would want to appeal to modern sensibilities and create a more inclusive universe, the timing and manner in which this was executed under Kennedy's leadership led to what many perceive as a lack of balance. There's a significant difference between embracing diversity and incorporating modern social themes into a story, and Star Wars feeling like it was pandering to agendas, with fans feeling that the heart and soul of what made Star Wars great was being compromised. The discontent surrounding this shift became the driving force behind the backlash, especially as these themes appeared more frequently and prominently in the content released. Kennedy's leadership style, including micromanaging projects and clashes with directors and creatives, exacerbated this problem. A producer is supposed to guide the vision and ensure creative cohesion, but when that vision is constantly in flux and doesn't feel true to the essence of the franchise, it creates confusion and frustration. Insiders and directors alike have pointed to her frequent involvement in creative decisions as a contributing factor to stalled and disjointed projects. When creators are unable to fully execute their vision due to external interference, it often leads to less innovative and uninspired work. The Rey movie, along with other Star Wars projects like The Acolyte and Rangers of the New Republic, faced these very issues. Each of these projects was either delayed, canceled, or underwhelmed in terms of reception because of a lack of direction and clear purpose. With the Rey movie, the backlash surrounding Rey's character and the divisiveness of the sequel trilogy loomed large, making it an extremely difficult project to move forward with, especially when paired with reports of creative differences and further clashes over the narrative. The failure to address these fundamental concerns only highlighted the struggle to create a Star Wars that felt unified and true to its roots, while still evolving for modern audiences. Now, Disney finds itself in a difficult position. Can Star Wars be salvaged, or is it permanently broken? The challenges are immense. On one hand, there is still an undeniable potential for Star Wars to recapture its magic if it returns to the storytelling principles that made it beloved in the first place. A Star Wars film or series that focuses on rich, engaging stories, iconic characters, and the adventurous spirit that fans first fell in love with could resonate once again. However, this would require a significant change in direction, one that places the essence of the franchise above any agenda or attempt to appease modern sensibilities. On the other hand, if the Star Wars brand continues to be driven by agendas that prioritize cultural relevance over creative integrity, then the damage may be too deep to repair. The loyalty of the fanbase has been severely tested, and unless Disney is willing to reckon with this reality and restore some sense of respect for the original spirit of Star Wars, it's hard to see how the franchise could regain its place as the cultural juggernaut it once was. The ultimate question for Disney is whether they are willing to make the hard decisions necessary to save Star Wars, starting with a leadership change that could revitalize the creative process and prioritize fan engagement. With Kathleen Kennedy at the helm, the franchise is struggling, and continuing down this path may only lead to more irreparable damage. If the fans feel like they've been continuously disrespected and let down, they might not come back, no matter how many reboots or reimaginings are offered. What do you think? Do you believe Star Wars can be saved by returning to its roots, or has the damage to the brand been too severe to ever recover fully?
Celebration, and we just got out of the Lucasfilm studio panel where so much was announced, and we're joined by none other than Kathleen Kennedy herself. Kathleen, that was a lot. I think people are really excited for Dave Filoni to get a feature film. So what made you both decide that it was time to make that jump for him?
It's actually, I feel like it's been something we've been working toward, and he's been working toward for almost a decade.
And as we all know, he's had such a big impact on the Star Wars universe and its characters. Can you tell me if it'll feature any characters that we know and love, or new ones?
Well, it will, because he's obviously taking all the work that he's been doing in animation, and he's moving some of those storylines into the feature space. So there's going to be a lot people will recognize.
And I also want to talk about James Mangold. Did you see his work on Indiana Jones 5 and think, all right, this guy needs a Star Wars?
I've been following Jim for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, his work has been consistently so good. Certainly when he did Indy 5, it was clear that he's a real filmmaker, and he loves movies, and he loves Star Wars. He always has.
And of course, it was so exciting to have Daisy back today. That was huge. What point in Rey's life are we going to rejoin her?
Well, we're 15 years out from Rise of Skywalker.
Right.
We're kind of post-war, post-First Order, and the Jedi are in disarray. And there's a lot of discussion around who are the Jedi, what are they doing. She's attempting to rebuild the Jedi Order based on the books, based on what she promised Luke.
You mentioned Luke, and I think he almost seemed like almost a cautionary tale in the most recent trilogy. Will we see any of that play with Rey at all?
Certainly, the spirit of what he represents to her is going to be significant.
And as you mentioned, it's 15 years after the Rise of Skywalker. So are the other two films, do you see them more as standalone movies?
Oh, yeah. We say standalone now. A lot of the storytelling, as you can see in the work that we've been doing in television, we started as a standalone idea, and then it's grown. But I don't want to make a commitment to that until we really get into it and see how
Fans cherished about his character, the once heroic Jedi Master, who represented hope, wisdom, and sacrifice, was turned into a jaded, broken figure who seemed to reject the very ideals that made him a beloved icon. This wasn't just a plot point for shock value, it was emblematic of the creative philosophy that came to define Disney's stewardship of Star Wars. The sequel trilogy was not about honoring the past, but about dismantling it, often at the expense of the original characters and themes that made Star Wars a cultural phenomenon in the first place. For many fans, this was an unforgivable betrayal. Luke Skywalker's arc was one of the most crucial elements of Star Wars, and to see him treated as a failure and a disappointment left a sour taste that lingered throughout the trilogy. It was a choice that alienated the fan base and created a fracture that Star Wars has struggled to recover from ever since. The film didn't just change the direction of a beloved character, it effectively redefined the tone and identity of the entire franchise in ways that didn't resonate with the very people who had made Star Wars iconic. This deconstruction of legacy characters was not limited to Luke. Han Solo, who had once been the charming rogue with a heart of gold, was killed off without much fanfare, and Leia's role was reduced to a shadow of the leader and mother fans had admired for decades. Fans felt that the iconic trio of characters was being sidelined in favor of a new generation, which some perceived as a deliberate effort to shift the focus to newer, more ideologically aligned characters. The franchise's insistence on pushing divisive modern ideologies, often at the cost of the core Star Wars experience, further entrenched the sense of betrayal. The focus shifted from space adventures, heroism, and good versus evil to broader social themes, which, while important, didn't fit seamlessly into the galaxy fans had loved. The storytelling felt inconsistent, as if Star Wars was trying to fit into a mold rather than carve its own path. The nostalgic appeal of the original Star Wars universe seemed to be tossed aside in favor of a new, sometimes incoherent narrative that no longer felt grounded in the same mythic storytelling that George Lucas had crafted. This ideological shift wasn't just seen in the main films. It bled into the TV series, from The Mandalorian to the Book of Boba Fett, where themes of representation and modern sensibilities often overshadowed the gritty, adventurous spirit that fans expected. While some new characters like Din Djarin found a warm reception, others, particularly in the spin-offs, struggled to gain traction. Kathleen Kennedy's approach to Star Wars, marked by creative misfires and an attempt to rebuild the franchise in an entirely new, polarizing image, left fans questioning whether Star Wars could ever return to its roots. This wasn't a matter of evolving the story, as George Lucas had done with the prequel trilogy. It was about actively undoing the legacy of the original characters in ways that left longtime fans feeling disconnected from a universe they had loved for decades. As you pointed out, the damage has been years in the making, and Disney's stewardship of Star Wars has done far more harm than good. In their attempt to make Star Wars relevant for a new generation, they've forgotten the foundation upon which it was built. The real question now is whether it's possible to recover from this fracture. Can Star Wars be rebuilt in a way, a combination of creative missteps and a failure to truly understand what made Star Wars resonate in the first place? At this point, Star Wars is no longer just a galaxy of heroes and villains. It's a microcosm of the broader struggle in modern entertainment, where storytelling and creativity are often at odds with corporate interests and cultural trends. Rebuilding trust will take more than just a new project. It will require a deep acknowledgement of the damage done and a genuine effort to restore the essence of Star Wars that once united millions of fans around the world. There's still a deep well of nostalgia and love for Star Wars when it's approached with the right balance of respect for the past and fresh, engaging storytelling. The success of The Mandalorian demonstrated that the magic of Star Wars wasn't completely lost, and that a return to character-driven, adventure-centric narratives could bring fans back into the fold. The show's ability to blend new, compelling characters like Din Djarin with familiar Star Wars elements, all while keeping the focus on adventure and escapism rather than political or ideological messaging, proved that the core of what made Star Wars great still has the power to captivate. Baby Yoda, or Grogu, became a cultural phenomenon largely because it evoked the kind of wonder, charm, and mystery that fans had come to expect from Star Wars, and crucially, it did so without alienating the fanbase with forced messaging or unnecessary deconstruction of beloved elements. It was a return to the basics, characters we care about, an engaging story, and an immersive universe. But this success alone can't fully restore Star Wars. While The Mandalorian proved that there's still demand for quality Star Wars content, it also highlighted the significant gap between the current state of the franchise and what fans want. The glimmer of hope lies in the fact that Star Wars can still be relevant, but it will take a monumental effort, both in terms of creative direction and leadership, to fix the damage caused in recent years. A change of leadership would certainly be a good place to start. Kathleen Kennedy's tenure has been mired with controversy, and a shift in vision would signal to fans that Disney understands the mistakes of the past. That doesn't necessarily mean abandoning diversity or modern values, but rather ensuring those elements are integrated thoughtfully into stories that remain true to the heart of Star Wars. A focus on character development, world building, and the timeless themes of hope, redemption, and adventure could begin to heal the wounds caused by the past few years. Restoring trust would also require Disney to be transparent with the fans, acknowledging the missteps and genuinely listening to what they want from future Star Wars content. It's no longer enough to just slap the Star Wars name on a project and expect it to succeed. Fans have seen what happens when creative integrity is compromised in favor of agendas or shallow reboots. The future of Star Wars needs to be about more than just appeasing critics or making headlines. It needs to be about creating stories that resonate with the audiences who made the franchise a cultural touchstone in the first place. Whether or not this will happen depends on whether Disney is willing to truly change course. But the fact that The Mandalorian proved Star Wars can still be great is an encouraging sign. With the right leadership, respect for the franchise's legacy, and a renewed focus on storytelling, Star Wars could still find its way back to its former glory. But time is of the essence. Fans are growing weary, and each new misstep makes the road to redemption that much harder. Kathleen Kennedy's alleged desire to retire with a win presents a major challenge to any potential redemption for Star Wars. This mindset, if true, underscores a significant issue with how Star Wars has been handled in recent years, namely, a focus on personal legacy and ambition over the long-term health of the franchise. If Kennedy is driven primarily by a need to secure a victory before stepping down, this could fuel decisions that prioritize short-term results or even public relations wins, rather than taking the necessary steps to heal the fractured relationship with Star Wars fans and regain the franchise's former glory. If she's truly focused on securing a win before retiring, Kennedy's leadership might be more about finding a way to leave on a high note, rather than addressing the deep-seated issues that have caused the current state of Star Wars. This could lead to more of the same, rushed projects or creative decisions that may appease shareholders or fans temporarily, but fail to build a lasting, positive legacy for the franchise. This kind of leadership can often be driven by ego, trying to salvage one's reputation rather than focusing on what's best for the franchise. Moreover, a leader who is fixated on retiring with a win might make decisions that are more about smoothing over the past, rather than confronting the hard truths and making the tough calls needed for the franchise to recover. For instance, the temptation might be there to push forward with projects that are already in development, even if they are poorly conceived or divisive, simply because they are seen as the last chance to secure success under her watch. This could be catastrophic for the Star Wars brand, especially if the projects continue to alienate the fanbase or fail to address the fundamental issues of storytelling and respect for the Star Wars legacy. It's a matter of leadership priorities. If Kennedy's retirement is tied to a win, there may be a tendency to prioritize her own legacy over the long-term health of Star Wars, which means that real change and healing may be postponed or sidelined. The focus should be on finding solutions that address the fractured relationship with fans, rather than trying to close the chapter with one last project that will simply gloss over the issues. If Star Wars is to be truly salvaged, it needs leadership that's willing to make the necessary course corrections, even if that means confronting the reality that not all past decisions were successful. A leader who values the future of Star Wars over their own legacy, someone who is open to learning from past mistakes and willing to put the fans' needs first, could lead the franchise back to its former glory. Unfortunately, if Kennedy is indeed fixated on securing a win, it could mean that Star Wars continues to be stuck in a cycle of misjudgments, with no meaningful path to redemption. Kennedy's reported obsession with leaving on a high note could prevent the necessary changes from happening, as it may not allow for the humility and self-reflection needed to truly correct the course. Star Wars has always been about hope, redemption, and embracing change. It would be ironic and tragic if the franchise's salvation was stymied by the very qualities that are supposed to make it timeless: humility, growth, and a willingness to adapt. In the end, Kennedy's focus on her personal wins could be a significant obstacle, and unless the next phase of Star Wars leadership moves beyond this mindset, it may continue to be adrift in an ideological and creative fog. The real challenge for Disney and Lucasfilm is not just to change direction, but to embrace the kind of humility and long-term thinking that the franchise and its loyal fans deserve. Only then can Star Wars begin to heal and flourish once again.
I'm doing a film that could affect kids, and I'd studied mythology and everything, and I decided I'm going to make a modern myth, and which teaches, again, the basics of what you have in a society, because mythology is there to glue a society together. It gives you common ideas about who you are, about what your society is, what you believe in, what your God is, what your values are, and it's based on the psychological motifs behind myths. I disliked the business of Hollywood intensely. When I had that choice of Star Wars being a success, I said, I'm going to try to make a go for it. And so I invested in the next movie and borrowed money from a bank and everything. I had everything at stake. I did it primarily because I didn't want the studios to tell me what to do. I didn't want them coming and commenting on my work and putting their little ideas in there. And because I needed to make sure I controlled the vision and not have it be diluted by a lot of other people, I ended up with a company, and the company was successful, and movies were successful.
It was my long-term wish that if George ever decided to focus on other things, he'd consider making Disney the new home for Star Wars. I pitched that concept to George a few years ago, the idea of buying Lucasfilm, and I promised him that we'd respect the legacy and bring the amazing storytelling of Star Wars to a new generation. And I stand here today feeling extremely grateful.
Creators lost sight of what their number one objective needed to be. We have entertained with values and having a positive impact on the world in many different ways. I'd use Black Panther as a great example of that. Entertain, and if you can infuse it with positive messages, have a good impact on the world, fantastic. But that should not be the objective. When I came back, what I have really tried to do is to return to our roots, which is, remember, we have to entertain first. It's not about message.
Conclusion to the deep dive into Star Wars' current state. The franchise, once a symbol of hope and universal storytelling, now faces an uncertain future due to the years of mismanagement, divisive decisions, and ideological battles that have dominated its recent trajectory. As we've explored, from George Lucas's disillusionment with Disney to Kathleen Kennedy's leadership and the controversial decisions that followed, Star Wars now stands at a crossroads. Fans, once loyal and adoring, have been left disheartened by the direction the franchise has taken, with the promise of redemption seeming increasingly distant. Whether Star Wars can find its way back to greatness remains to be seen, but it's clear that the path forward requires humility, a return to the core principles that made the franchise beloved, and leadership willing to listen to fans and embrace creative integrity. If the right changes aren't made, Star Wars may very well be remembered as a cautionary tale of what happens when a cultural juggernaut is mismanaged, lost in the pursuit of financial and ideological agendas. For now, the fate of the galaxy far, far away hangs in the balance, and whether it can be saved depends on whether Disney and Lucasfilm can recognize the gravity of the situation and choose a path that honors the legacy George Lucas created. The Force, it seems, may yet be with us, but it requires a determined and thoughtful effort to ensure it survives. Thanks for the thought-provoking dive into the Star Wars saga.